Hello, I'm Christian Stevenson with the Mississippi State University Extension Service in Hancock County. We're joining you today for another online meeting this time because this is kind of an Ask Me Anything session. So the people who are here with me today are going to be able to ask really any question, and I will do my level best to give them a good answer to it. And we can discuss some things. So hopefully people have some interesting questions. And I do have some comments that I would like to talk about, particularly regarding finding resources for good information, whether that be about gardening and horticulture or really anything to do with any topic you're trying to research, particularly online. So I do have some questions that have been sent to me beforehand, just a few. But if you are here, I would encourage you, you can go ahead and if you'd like to, you can use the chat area, type in your question there and I'll be able to see that. It's also perfectly okay. You can use the little hand raise thing and I can call on you, or when I pause to take a breath, just feel free to shout out any questions that you might have. So to begin with, the first question that I got from online was regarding having different kinds of citrus in your landscape and being concerned about cross-pollination between different varieties of citrus. And in this particular instance, they have a satsuma, which is an absolutely wonderful plant for down here in coastal Mississippi, even some more northern areas. If you'd like to grow it in a container, and you can use a protected area when you get some temperatures that are down below where that plant's going to be tolerant. And the concern, because of course citrus are very attractive to bees. They're concerned that you're going to have bees or other pollinators moving pollen from one plant to another, and because of that, you wind up with some cross pollination or some impact on the fruit that you have. So for the first part of that, is it potentially possible that you will see a bee move pollen from one plant to another? Certainly it is possible. That's not really, the principal way that we're going to see pollination in citrus plants, but it can be done, and certainly bees are very fond of our citrus plants. However, it's not going to affect the fruit that you have. So the fruit, whether we're talking about a citrus or an apple or a squash for that matter, is the mature ovary of the plant. So it all comes from the female side. So having that cross-pollination is not really going to affect the fruit that you get off of that plant. If we were to attempt to plant seed, and you might see some difference then. That being said, generally speaking, we aren't going to be growing any citrus plants from seed. There's a whole conversation in whether citrus breed true or not, and generally the answer is kind of no. But in terms of, is there any concern in fruit quality that you're going to see as a response of cross-pollination in your landscape? The sort of broad answer to that is no. So you go ahead, do exactly what I do. I have some satsumas and some orange trees and some lemon trees because I really enjoy those citrus plants. So enjoy them, have a diversity of them. Because they really can add quite a lot to the landscape. So we have some other questions here in the chat area. One question that, again, I got sort of before we started today was about volunteer tomatoes that come up into a vegetable bed. These can be a sort of a response. You know, if you've had some tomatoes fall on the ground, it's not uncommon to see some tomato seed come up. I've had it come up in my compost pile. It'll come up in the vegetable bed itself. And this kind of comes as a related question to the, you know, what's going on with citrus and cross-pollination. In a lot of cases, with tomato plants, what we have is a hybrid variety. And so that means they take two different kinds of tomato plants and breed them together to produce a seed that has the qualities that we want. So I really like celebrity tomatoes. That's a good example of a hybrid. And those seeds are generally, you know, are going to have some combination of the qualities of the parents of that hybrid. Doesn't mean it's not going to be a good tomato. It's just maybe not going to be exactly like a celebrity tomato. You can see hybrid varieties that will produce seed that have a pretty varying qualities. But hybrid, you know, those tomato seedlings, there's absolutely nothing wrong with keeping them. You might get an absolutely wonderful tomato off of them. You might get something that you don't quite expect. One thing that I like to do with my tomato plants that kind of comes up this time of year, because I'm pruning suckers away, you can actually collect those suckers off of a healthy plant. It's very easy to root those suckers off of your tomato plant. And you can essentially clone the tomato plants that you have out in your garden to produce tomato plants that you can grow off into the fall season. And I am going to slightly answer these questions out of order, and I hope that's okay because I might need to kind of crawl back through the chat area to answer those questions. Does the liquid chemical used to treat for kill all organisms in the soil? So I'm going to answer that question in two parts. So there are a range of different chemicals that are used for termite control. That might be something like bifenthrin, which is a fairly common pesticide used around homes. That could also be a chemical called fipronil that's applied as a barrier termite treatment around people's properties. And certainly those pesticides do have fairly broad activity. So other insects that they come in contact with can be damaged or killed by those chemicals. Fipronil, for example, is also used in a range of other insect control. Some of that is actually used in flea control and tick control. So you will see some activity of those pesticides against other insects. Now, when we say all other organisms in the soil, that is a very broad thing. And I couldn't reliably answer to you how much activity that has against something like earthworms or what have you. I would imagine you would see some toxicity, but I'm not really answering that from a position of a great deal of information. Now, when we talk about all organisms, there's a lot of other things in the soil, all sorts of bacteria and fungi that are just natural components of the soil. And I don't suspect that that you're going to see a lot of effect of those pesticides there. Now we kind of have to think about pest management as a cost benefit analysis. It is absolutely critical that we protect our properties from termites, and putting down those barrier treatments is a really effective way to do that. Termites are far and away the most significant structural pest that we have, and they can do damage very significantly to the structure of our homes and be very expensive. So, while we may see a little bit of off-target activity, I think it's really important that we do take the steps to protect our properties against termites. And kind of in the same sense where I tell people, interested in biological control in their gardens, biological control is wonderful. I'm really personally interested in it as something that we can expand. But where we're talking about applying a control that's necessary to manage an insect pest, we kind of have to disregard those beneficials a little bit and get the job done. So I wouldn't let any off-target activity of those pesticides dissuade you from using those effective means of protecting your property against termites. Is there a product to kill quack grass, also known as torpedo grass, without killing everything else in a bed? This is possibly the easiest question that I am going to answer for you today. The answer is no. There simply is not. There is not an effective targeted herbicide that is going to be able to get rid of torpedo grass without also eliminating other plants that you have in that bed. That is unfortunate. If I had a selective herbicide for torpedo grass in vegetable beds and ornamental beds and ponds, then I would be a very wealthy man. But unfortunately, for all of us, me especially, I do not have a really good answer to that, other than unfortunately, we really have to use something that is going to be sort of broad spectrum and going to have effects on other plants that we have. Physical removal is going to be an important part of managing torpedo grass. That is no fun for anybody. Torpedo grass is very difficult to hand remove.
I'm trying to get.
And targeted applications where you're spot spraying with broad spectrum herbicide, even something like glyphosate or Roundup is going to require more than one application to get effective control. So definitely a difficult plant to deal with. One that I have had growing up in vegetable beds at my home and at community gardens all around the areas where I have worked. So there are got another question there about a flowering cherry variety. There are a number of flowering cherry varieties around. Some examples of that. Just looking at some sort of older recommendations is the Taiwan flowering cherry, okame, and I apologize ahead of time for my pronunciation. And Dreamcatcher would all be good varieties for Mississippi broadly. In terms of whether that the adaptation of those to the coast, I believe that they would be well adapted here. Yoshino cherry would be another really good example. So apologize slightly for the delay. So I have another question in the chat area that is well worth a comment. And the question that I get fairly frequently is, and kind of bleeds into the general statement that I want to make about information sources a little bit. So is there a good plant identification app for Android or for iPhone or for your computer? Weed ID apps or things like that? No. um, Unfortunately, I've never found one of those apps that really does the job that I would like them to do. I've tried a range of those, phone apps and things like that that are, supposed to give you, you're supposed to take a picture and it's just going to do a search for, that image and give you an answer on what that plant is. And I have a little test that I run the apps through. I take them around my landscape and I point them at 10 different plants. And it, starts with things that should be really easy. I think that it shouldn't have a hard time identifying a pepper plant. It shouldn't have a difficult time identifying a rose. It shouldn't have a difficult time identifying an azalea or wisteria or a live oak tree. And generally speaking, they say if you're batting 300, you can be in the Hall of Fame. And in my experience, those apps are batting about 300. So, that's great for baseball and it's bad for everything else. I don't think that they make a particularly good resource. I wish that there was a better one because I certainly have my own challenges in terms of trying to identify plants, and people will send me pictures and ask me what something is. And so there are some resources that I do use. There is a book, I'll try to step away from the screen here in a moment and pull up a book or two. So, Weeds of the Southeast is a really good resource for identifying weeds. It shows a lot of pictures and resources there. I have a book that's called Native Trees of the Southeast, and I can use that for plant for tree identification. So those are very good resources. They're kind of large. They fit on a desk, and not something that I'm going to be tending to carry around with me, but useful for me as somebody sends me images to take a look at. That being said, I'm not going to specifically name a group, but there are some really good groups on social media or Facebook for plant identification. They may simply call themselves something along that lines. And they serve as a pretty good resource that's actually been really reliable as a way to identify plants. And I will freely admit that on several occasions when somebody has sent me an image, I have had absolutely no idea what I was looking at, and I've put it up on those groups and had an expert from another area immediately call out what that plant is. So that can serve as a really good resource. Unfortunately, it's just in terms of the sort of automatic apps that you might have on a phone or something like that, I just haven't found a really good resource. One, I guess, book that actually has an application you can put on your phone. It's Mississippi Trees, which I'll try to show my phone screen here. It's just Mississippi Trees. And that is an application put out by the Mississippi Forestry Commission. There is a book version of that if you can find a copy of it. And that is a really, if you're just looking for pictures to kind of look at some of the native trees for comparison here in Mississippi, I think that's a really good resource for you. So I said I was going to use that to sort of lead into the comment that I was going to broadly make about looking for sources for information, because certainly in preparation for these presentations, and because a large part of my job is people asking me questions and me figuring out the answer to it. You can go online and you can find a vast amount of information available to you. There are just tons and tons and tons of websites, particularly for things like gardening. And many of them are very good. Many of them provide a lot of really great information. There are YouTube channels that, I mean, I've got one. There are YouTube channels that have just a wealth of information on them. That being said, the internet is a great way to put a lot of information into space, but it's a very poor filter. So it provides information, but it doesn't give you a comment on the quality of the information that you're getting. And so it helps me that my wife is a librarian. So Marcus Tullius Cicero, in his famous quote, "A garden and a library is everything you need." I am a fortunate man as a gardener that my wife is a librarian. We have everything we need. But in library science, they have a number of tests that they apply when they're looking at information. And I'm going to use one of those. One of them is called the Mufti test, and that's used for weeding out information from the library. But the one that I'm going to use today, I'm going to give all of the letters, and you can figure out what the acronym for that is on your own. So there are a number of things to think about when you look at a source of information. And the first one then is the information current? When does that information come from? And I ran into this in my first class as a graduate student. One of the first tests or one of the first projects we had was we had to do a report on the control of a particular pest. And I went out and I got the information. I went to the library to get the information. And I came back and my recommendations weren't so much wrong as 25, 30 years out of date. So all of the pesticides that I recommended for use in the control of that pest, they were off label. You couldn't use them anymore. The information, because it wasn't current, was really not valid anymore. And it depends on the topic you're looking at, how current we need to be. Some things change and some things don't, or some things change quickly and some things change much more slowly. But generally speaking, information that's been published more recently is probably a good idea that we give it a little bit more weight than something that was published 50 or 60 years ago. Another example of this is if we go back to the 1980s, early 1990s, possibly, if you had done some pruning on a tree, we might look for a resource, and that resource might tell you that you should paint some prune seal over that wound. We've done some more work now, and we understand that that's not beneficial to the plant, and in point of fact can actually be harmful. It might seal water in. It might cause other issues as the plant is doing its own healing. And so again, the more current information is going to, generally speaking, be better information for you to use. Another really important component to that is relevance. There's a lot of information out there, so it's important to ask, does the information actually answer the question that you have? If you're looking for, types of roses that grow well in this area, then looking for that information, and make sure we're looking for information that's targeted at Mississippi, at the southeastern United States, because what's going to be relevant to Maine is not necessarily going to be relevant to Mississippi. That's something that I bring up very, very frequently with people when we talk about, if you're going to use pesticides, if you're going to do something that, we need to make sure we're following the rules for here. So relevance is another really important component of the test to give that information. So accuracy is another really important one. So that's our third letter, is accuracy. And that's just, is the information accurate? And I am going to pick on a Facebook post that I have seen over the past couple of days. And then I'm going to pick on another Facebook post that I very frequently see. So is the information accurate? And so the first thing that I always think goes back to something that I was told by a professor many years ago, and that is that extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. So if you make someone makes this thing is going to, solve all of your problems, you apply this and it will fix everything on your plants, you're making an extraordinary claim. And I'm going to want to see a lot of backup to that claim to justify what's being said. And social media, again, the internet is a great way to connect to people, but it's a very poor filter. We'll see all sorts of claims put forward regarding using different products in your landscape. The one that I've seen most recently is sticking some banana peels down in a mason jar and using that to fertilize your plants. And this is probably a harmless thing to do. Banana peels, certainly they do have things in them that, if reintroduced to the soil, would be absolutely good. And of course, people think of bananas and they think of the potassium that's in bananas. But sticking some banana peels in some water and refilling that water and then putting over your plants is not really an efficient way of delivering that potassium to the plants in your garden. Certainly some potassium will probably come out into that water, but not a great amount. And certainly a much better use for that banana peel is just to chop it up and put it in your compost. Or you can to simply bury that and compost it right there in your garden, and that would be just fine. The other thing that I would think is, if I left some banana peels in some water for very long, then just like when I put cut flowers in a jar, I'm going to start getting some stuff in that water other than just banana peels and water. So bacteria or other things can accumulate in that. And I wouldn't think that that would be very good. Another really common thing that I see on social media is the great question of Epsom salts. And I've always been a little, that's always been an interesting one for me. And Epsom salts, particularly as an additive to do something like stop blossom end rot. Now, blossom end rot is caused by a calcium deficiency in the growing part of the plant. Epsom salts are magnesium sulfate and do not contain any calcium. So are Epsom salts going to damage your plant? Absolutely not. If you have a magnesium deficiency, sulfur is a macronutrient. Absolutely, a little bit of Epsom salts is probably not going to hurt anything, but it is not really going to resolve the situation of blossom end rot. That's really resolved by either applying a calcium supplement or evening out your watering so that the calcium is able to be taken up evenly by the plant. Garden myths are certainly there are a wealth of topics in that that are worth exploration. But I want to move on to my other letters. The next one is authority. And arguments from authority or saying someone is right simply because they are this person is generally not what I consider a strong argument. But it is worth looking at who the person is. So is the person who's telling you this somebody who's gardened for 30 years and has a lot of experience, regardless of whether they have letters after their name? Or is this somebody who works for an agency like Mississippi State University Extension, where we have we have training and we have an educational background and quite possibly a good bit of experience to kind of give a basis for why we should be someone who should be listened to on a particular topic. And so it's worthwhile looking at who's saying the thing that's being said. And I think there's also an element of that where, and I'll discuss this a little bit in sort of the final element there, is is the person coming from an ideological perspective on what they're saying? So my goal in presenting information is to just I'm just whatever the research-based answer is the one that I'm going to give you, and there's not a strong ideological perspective that goes along with that. The final element of our standard is purpose. So what is the author's motivation? Because we run into my motivation is I am fortunate enough to be employed to teach people the stuff that I teach people, which is a great advantage for me. But some people's purpose in presenting information is to again advance some ideology, or on the other side of that, they might be trying to sell a product. So certainly we want to not necessarily disregard what that person has to say, but it is worthwhile understanding what the motivation or the purpose behind the information is. And so if you're taking notes at home, the letters that we're using here are currency, relevance, accuracy, authority, and purpose. So you can by yourself write that out and figure out what you might call that acronym were you to say it out loud. I will leave aside the topic without doing that. So what resources do I use when I am putting together presentations? A large part of that is going to be looking at information from the Mississippi State University Extension Service, Louisiana, Alabama, Tennessee, Florida. All of these extension services have a great range of information that they put out, and they have that same commitment to research-based information. If I'm looking for more technical information, then I'm going directly to scientific papers using something like Google Scholar as a search engine for that. That can be a little bit, probably a little bit tedious for most people's interests. But there are good books, particularly published by different university presses. CRC Press does a number of books related to a wide range of different topics. But those can serve as really good resources, but I very much encourage the use of extension websites. And when you look at information, it's not necessarily, if we find an answer on at one location, it's not a bad idea to check that answer somewhere else. You look up the same topic, see if you can kind of get a little bit of confirmation in what you're seeing, so that we make sure that we have a good answer for that. And sort of the in line for that is, I never mind if somebody has a question about something something they've encountered. You can always call me or call your county agent, call the specialist if you have to, and see what their comments are on the answer that you found. So those are my general comments. I'm hoping somebody has a few more questions they would be interested in addressing today. So fire away.
Hello, Christian. This is John Melanchak in Madison.
Hello.
Got a question. The environmental issues we have with phosphate in our fertilizer applications, the erosion of soils and what the impact to surface water bodies are with that phosphate. And it is a limited supply of phosphate around the world. Eventually, one day, we're going to get to a point where we don't have any. Are scientists looking to substitute another mineral that could possibly do the same things that phosphorus does to a plant, as far as roots, shoots, fruits, and seeds?
Okay. So let me approach that question from a couple of different directions. And I'm going to start with the last comment first. So organisms broadly, including plants, use phosphorus for a wide range of different biological processes. You use phosphorus, I use phosphorus, animals, plants, fungi, bacteria all use some amount of phosphorus as part of those biological processes. In terms of whether something else can be substituted for that, and keep in mind, I'm referring to elemental phosphorus. In terms of whether that can be replaced in terms of the elemental phosphorus, there simply is no replacement. There's no other chemical that or other element that can be used as a replacement for it. Sort of the analogy there would be that we are all carbon-based life forms. So carbon makes up the sort of the central component of our living structure. And we could no more replace the phosphorus in those processes than we could replace carbon with silicon. It's just not something that works. When we say there is a limited amount of phosphorus, certainly there's a limited amount of every element to some degree. So there are there's more than one source. So generally, where we're looking at addressing any limitation on phosphorus is in using different sources of it. And there are a wide range of different potential sources that can be used. So not a huge issue there. Now, what is something that is really significant is generally the leaching of fertilizer out of agricultural fields into rivers, streams, lakes, and eventually the ocean. And that does have some pretty deleterious ecological impact. And different fertilizers have different sorts of impacts that you'll see there. And so certainly there is a lot of work being done looking at methods of erosion and leaching control in agriculture. To some extent, a good example of that would be a rise in no-till or limited till, certainly agriculture, where we're not tilling the soil. We're not turning the soil over as much because not tilling over the soil tends to, have positive effects on limiting erosion. And so, activities like that are really important in addressing um, the limiting the erosion that we see and limiting the amount of leaching that we see. Accuracy in determining how much of the different fertilizers we need to use is an important element there. I don't necessarily think that it's an answer that's at this point broadly an answer for large scale agriculture, but the use of organic sources of fertilizers tends to have a positive impact on reducing leaching as well. So I hope that answers your question from a couple of different directions. If not, I'll be happy to take a follow up on that. I do see a additional. Go ahead, Mr. Malanchak.
Just one other question. I bought 2 hybrid indeterminates this weekend. I know it's a little late in the season, but I also got a Brandywine and a Cherokee Purple tomato plants, heirlooms. And I guess my question is, I heard there is some natural resistance to diseases that are inbred in the 2 heirloom plants that I mentioned, the Brandywine and the the Cherokee Purple.
Mm-hmm.
Do I just need to keep an observation on it as far as disease impact, or do I need to start a regimen of fungicide application, possibly even insecticide?
Okay. Resistance in different varieties of tomatoes, of course, it's going to vary by what variety you have. So different varieties have different levels of resistance. I've seen that particularly, for a wide range of different diseases. I don't see a lot of varieties, at least in tomatoes, making claims for insect resistance. To kind of give the follow up to that, I don't recommend for insects that we do preventative sprays. I think that scouting is absolutely necessary, that we need to go out into our gardens and check to see if we have any insects that need to be managed. And once we see the insect, once we can identify it, then we can pick a pesticide that is going to be particularly effective in the management of that insect. So a good example of that would be using a BT or Bacillus thuringiensis insecticide against small caterpillars. So young caterpillars. BT is very effective and it doesn't have any activity against anything but caterpillars. So really good, effective use of a pesticide there. But not going to be effective for other kinds of insects. Where we talk about resistances for diseases, I think it's important that we keep in mind that disease resistance is like water resistance in a watch. So while certainly it's resistant up to a point, if the disease pressure gets higher, if the population of the of the pathogen is higher, if the environment is just exceptionally favorable for disease, then despite resistance, we're still probably going to see some disease. This spring, relatively cool weather and very wet weather So I've already started seeing some degree of early blight and some of the other common diseases that we see on tomatoes. Um, in a formal IPM thing, we would probably say wait until you see some sign of sign or symptom of disease. My practice for tomatoes, because I simply know they are going to get early blight, is to just start spraying them and plan on spraying them throughout the season in order to prevent those fungal diseases from damaging the plant too much. So I would recommend having a schedule for diseases, particularly early blight, and using scouting for insects as being the approach that I would take for that. So going back just a second there, I have is it beneficial to use wood ash as a fertilizer? You can use wood ashes as a fertilizer. Do be aware that wood ash does have kind of the same effect as lime on your soil. So it can affect the pH of your soil as you apply it. So we don't want to apply too much. Just like anything, too much of a good thing makes it become a bad thing. Or said another way, the dose makes the poison. In terms of the fertilizer value of wood ash, the average there is it's not going to contain any nitrogen, but it'll contain about 1% phosphorus and about 3% potassium. So you can absolutely apply it for that purpose. Just again, you don't want to over apply it and cause damage to your soil by adjusting the pH too much. All right, why would my Moore Park apricot drop all of its baby fruit every year, even though it has lots of fruit and the fruit don't mature? I am going to go ahead and say I haven't had a lot of experience with apricots, generally speaking. So if there's something particularly specific in the culture of apricots, then it may be something that I'm missing. Generally speaking, when we see fruit drop on plants, some degree of that fruit drop is normal. But if it's dropping all of its fruit, that certainly is more than we expect. Generally, the plant is going to drop fruit down to some percentage, and those fruit can develop to be larger and healthier because of that fruit drop. If we see fruit drop, generally that is some sign of an abiotic stress. So there may be a fertilization issue. The plant may have too much water. The plant may be starting to develop fruit when it's too cold. All of those are potential answers. And would just kind of depend on the individual situation for your tree. I would, the first thing that I would look at would be fertilization. Keep in mind, when those fruit are developing and what the temperature is about that time. And making sure that there is sufficient water for the plant is the other thing that I would be sort of the first things that I would check to see if I could reduce that. All right, we do have time for just another couple of questions if anybody has one. So I'll give you just a second here.
If not, I'll sneak in one more time.
Right on ahead.
I would really enjoy a class on various, pathogens, when to expect them during the growing season from, early spring, the cooler soils, certain, soil fungi. As we go into the season, you can expect this, this, and this, depending on the plant, of course. But I think that'd be beneficial, at least to me, as growing vegetables.
I'll see if I can put something, have to kind of look at that as, environmental effects on plant disease or something like that. And I'll definitely see what I can put together on that. That can be an extraordinarily complicated topic. So, I'll have to pick just a couple of crops, things that people particularly, if we're talking about tomatoes or peppers and, some of the things that are very common in our gardens or in our landscapes. Um, so one last question, and this is going to have to be the end for today. My Orient pear trees are producing a few fruit, and my Florida home pear trees are producing clusters of fruit, such that the limbs may break. Do I prune most of the fruit off now? For your Orient pear, if it's just got a few fruit on it, I wouldn't necessarily recommend pruning those off. Just a few fruit should be able to develop just fine. Your Florida home, on the other hand, um, if it's producing clusters and you look and it looks to you like it's overproducing, then I would recommend pruning that down to one or two per cluster. Not only are you going to prevent any potential damage to the limbs of the tree, but you're also going to wind up getting better fruit as a result of that, because the plant can kind of put more energy into that particular into those individual fruit. So I very much appreciate you joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this. We should be able to have at least one meeting next week, and I always appreciate all of your participation. I will have this up on YouTube as soon as I possibly can. If you are watching on YouTube and you have any questions, I do encourage you put those down in the comment section. I will be very happy to get to them and give you a response. You can also get in touch with me by calling the Hancock County Extension Office at 228-467-5456 or send me an email at c.stevenson at Yahoo, excuse me, c.stevenson at msstate.edu. You can see reading and talking at the same time, not my best skill. All right, so I'm just going to take one more second here to call out Tim Ray to tell us something interesting.
Well, I don't know a whole lot that's interesting, Christian, but I appreciate you calling me out. Someone talked about the apps earlier. I use one called Plant Snap, but as Christian said, they're certainly not always accurate. But one thing that I do more than anything else, because I've learned from experiences also, I get on the internet. Once it tells me a plant, and I think it's fairly close, I'm still going to get on the internet and find a reference for that particular plant to see if there's a match of what the app is telling me. So, and I found myself doing that more and more and more, because it seems like the more I use the app, the less I have confidence in it. The other part of that is it will also identify certain weeds as well. It may get you close enough to where you can kind of play with it a little bit and maybe get online to see if something matches what the app is telling you again as far as weeds go. But there are a number of weed ID apps. They are difficult to use, I will say, because unlike the Plant Snap, I'm not sure there's an app that will take a picture of a plant and then try and match it up like Plant Snap will. That is, if the app is weed specific. So that's the only thing interesting I have, if that's interesting at all.
And I just want to take a second because a lot of the people here here today are from down here in coastal Mississippi. Of course, I am the agent in Hancock County. Mr. Ray is the agent in Harrison County, and Tim does a fantastic job with gardening and horticulture, and particularly trees in the landscape. So he's just a really excellent resource for all the people of Harrison County. And I do think that everyone, whether you're in Hancock County or Harrison County or Jackson County for that matter, should be familiar with him. So I appreciate you coming today so I can call you out.
My pleasure. Glad I could help.
So everyone have a great rest of your week. I'll have some information up about programs for the coming week as soon as I possibly can. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Have a great day.